So welcome back to Worth the Effort Woodworking. In my last trip to SWAT, the Southwest Area Turners Association, I had the fortunate experience of meeting up with James Johnson. He's a pretty well-known wood turner in this part of the country, known for some outrageous vessels, and I'd featured him in past symposium visits. Well, he was gracious enough to invite me out to his shop to take a tour, which is kind of exciting because if you know anything about him, well, he's been a lifelong builder. I mean, worked in the construction industry, and in the early 60s, he got into wood turning by building his own lathe. And since then, he's built several more as his skills and needs and project desires have changed. So, yeah, I ain't turning out an invite to that kind of shop. So how about you come along with me and we can visit one of the legendary turners in Texas. Okay, this place is just cool. Big barn dominium, an OG barn dominium. It's been here for a while. It's like an old Corvair. Just says, come on in. Oh, wow, cool. Check that out. Right off the get-go, we have a turn piece on the wall. I'm looking at this thing right here. Ladder you cut up.
86, so when did you turn that?
Yeah, about 86.
That is pretty cool.
A mahogany platter, and then he had nothing better to do than cut it.
Then cut it up.
You know, back then, hardly anybody did that.
Yeah.
He was a little ahead of his time sometimes.
Okay, looking around, I'm seeing pieces that I've seen at SWAT before all over the place in past years. Pretty cool. These are the ones that I've been noticing the past few years. Let me get you a microphone. I imagine just having all this stuff on your kitchen counters.
Well, that's why I built a big wide counter.
That makes sense.
So I can display it. This piece here, with all the little miniatures in it, I went to the AAW symposium, and they have a rule about bringing pieces into their instant gallery. You can only bring 3 pieces.
So you brought one piece with a bunch of different parts?
So, as it turns out, since all of these are glued down, it's one piece. Even though if you take the individual pieces, I had 10% of the pieces in the gallery. And so it's just my way of saying the AAW up
Yeah, I understand. That's pretty cool.
And at the time that I made them, I was traveling in a motorhome, and I had a little jet mini with me. And I would stop at RV parks, and I'd set up the lathe and start turning, and all of a sudden I'd have a crowd of people.
You'd have a crowd around you.
And I enjoyed doing that. And these are a series that I did of cliff dwellings. After a road trip to Mesa Verde, and incidentally to every other available Indian dwellings or Indian ruins or whatever, I went through a phase of making Indian themed pieces.
Using the natural bark inclusion as a cave?
To some degree, but you can see I enlarged them.
Oh yeah. Pretty cool. I haven't seen those at SWAT. Have you shown them there?
I don't think so.
Now these telescoping pieces, I've seen you do quite a bit in the past few years.
Yes, all of those are from David Ellsworth.
Ellsworth.
Yeah, Ellsworth started doing this.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he makes his like 9 feet tall though.
Well, those are hard to carry around.
Those are hard to carry around and they require tall ceiling. And as far as I know, I'm the first guy to come up with the doubles. You know,
The doubles are just a crotch of a tree, two
No.
branches.
no, they're not.
No, they aren't.
They are not. They are all made from one piece of burl or interesting wood, or we'll call it that way. And you see, we're just cutting them all out in a spiral pattern.
Right.
Not even a spiral pattern, just a round pattern. We cut through the wall and then just cut the piece out with a bandsaw.
Right.
Then we have to sand the core, and then we make another cutting. Over here, with the doubles, I just used what shall we say, a figure 8 piece of wood.
Just from the side of a log or.
Doesn't matter wherever it's from.
Wherever it's
Usually it's got bark inclusion. In other
Right.
words, it's the very outside edge of the piece of wood. All of these are actually. But you don't have to make it round. You can make it egg shaped and end up turning it out, cutting it out.
Yeah, but that takes more skill in the bandsaw.
Well, it all takes a lot of bandsaw blades
Oh,
because I'm using 1/8 inch wide blades. And by the time you get through cutting one of these things, you've used 6, 8, 10 blades.
oh,
So it gets fairly expensive after a while to make these things. But I went through a phase of doing that, and I go through a phase of doing stuff quite often.
Well,
Or
what-
different phases.
Did you learn anything from doing these that you've been applying elsewhere? I mean, that's mainly a bandsaw skill
No.
setup, but that was kind of just dedicated to those.
It was just dedicated to making these.
I am appreciating that the figure 8 really does show off the chatoyance of some of these
It does
species.
indeed.
I mean, you
This-
look, walking around that one, I mean, the light just changes all the way around. It's
Yeah.
kind of cool.
Yeah, that's a magnificent piece of wood.
So what other phases have you gone through?
Well, the Mimbres Indians lived in southern New Mexico, 1,000, 2,000 years ago. And they're famous for their painted pottery. And so I bought all the books that you can buy about the Mimbres pottery. And not trying to copy any particular one, but inspired by them, I made a series of pieces.
Pretty cool.
And these were just plain pieces of wood, and I put the pattern in there with masking tape and spray painted it.
So what was that?
Pulled the masking tape off, took an X-Acto knife and scraped all the paint that ran under the masking tape.
Yeah, but that's pretty smooth.
Well, you just put 3 or 4 coats of lacquer on top of it,
Okay.
and that makes it smooth. But that's where these came from.
And at the same Indian themed phase, that's where you were doing the thin hollowings. 'Cause
Oh,
I know,
no, that's just a thin hollow.
I know Dad went through a phase like that, where he was just turning those out by
No,
the
that's
dozen.
just,
Just a ridiculously thin hollow.
yeah, well,
I called those Dad's show-off pieces.
yeah, this is a show-off piece. But then I have those everywhere. This was a piece of redwood burl.
That one?
Yes. And the piece of wood cost $250 to start with. And then when I made it, you cannot, as it turned out, you cannot turn redwood smooth. It's just too
Off
soft.
a blade.
Yeah. So I ended up having to wire brush it.
Did you have to wire brush it because sanding would go in and out of the
Yeah.
hard grain?
Yes. It just wouldn't sand out smooth.
Yeah.
So needless to say, I made this one time, and I'll never make another one.
Now, these are what I know you from, because you always seem to have the biggest displays at SWAT.
Yeah, well, the piece in the corner there is the largest piece I've ever done in volume.
In volume.
I've made taller pieces and I've made larger in diameter pieces, but in volume it's the largest piece. It weighed 750 pounds when I started, and it now weighs 11 pounds. So you can literally pick it up between your thumb and forefinger.
And you created a lot of mulch.
And all the wood that came off of that was come off one shaving at a time.
So
So
you have some kind of massive hollowing system, because that's what, 3 feet of hollowing off of the tool rest to get down to the bottom?
yeah. It's a 2-inch square bar.
A 2-inch. Okay.
Yeah, 2 inches square. And it's, in this case, it was 8 feet long, which
8
was
feet
pushed.
back to go 3 feet in.
Yeah, which was pushing the limits. It should have been 12 feet long. If it had been 12 feet long, it would have been much easier to turn that. If you have like a 3-to-1 ratio,
Right.
whatever the tool is hanging over the tool rest, you need 3 times the length behind.
I think I know that I'm hanging over 12 inches and I'm getting chatter.
Of course,
I can't imagine
the
hanging,
tool is bending.
Yeah, I can't imagine hanging 3 feet over and not getting wild about to. Unless
Well,
you're taking very light
You
cuts.
you take very light cuts.
I'm a gorilla turner, so
Anyway, all of them were turned with the same setup, the same tools. This one, since it's more than 2 feet in diameter, and my lathe only will handle 2 feet, I had to buy another lathe and modify it, and in order to turn that one piece, and that's the only piece I ever turn on the lathe. And then I ended up selling the lathe.
that's dedication. Now, this stitching effect, I've been seeing that in a lot of your work these past few years. Is that something you've been doing a really long time, or is that just recent?
A long time. No, this piece was 30 some odd inches in diameter when I turned it. But in the process, I came across a scar down at the very bottom. This tree grew on the riverbank. The river flooded when the tree was young, and something hit the tree, knocked off the bark, and so it formed a scar.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't see the scar until I'm literally 80% through hollowing it. And so I went ahead and finished hollowing the piece, even though I knew the scar would not make it a viable commercial piece. So I went ahead and I hollowed it out. And for 11 years, it was my cutoff box. If I cut off a little piece of wood I wanted to save, I just threw it in there. And one day I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, now how can I salvage that? And it came to me, if I cut a pie-shaped piece out of it with the scar in the wide part of the pie shape, I could take the 2 pieces left over, join them together, and end up with an oval piece. And so that's what I did. And that was the first of my split series. So, yes, I sewed it together with strips.
So it took years of abuse, you tossing stuff at it, and then you turned it into something to
then
showcase.
I turned it into something that would be at least good enough to be in my living room. So
is this corner your highlights reel?
oh, to some degree. Those are my alien drinking vessels. Now, an alien drinking vessel, since we don't know what an alien really is or how they drink, as long as it's got a container that'll hold some liquid,
You can call it an alien.
it's an alien drinking vessel. It can be anywhere from a bucket to the most elaborate thing you can think of. So anything falls into that classification.
And you've got that trademark now.
So those are my alien drinking vessels,
Pretty cool.
made over a number of years.
You know, I did notice this piece, because this is something I'm experimenting right now with a bowl of doing piercings, texturing, and then incorporating that solid
Well,
area.
That is a gourd.
That's not turned. That's just a straight up gourd.
That's a gourd. Yes. And these are Anna's pieces. And these are pieces, there are tools that her father made.
Are these more of Anna's? These pieces here?
These are all Anna's.
Pretty cool.
This is mine, that's mine.
How'd you do that?
Yeah, that's the question that all woodturners ask.
Of course.
I did it on the lathe. It's 3 pieces.
Yeah.
It's an end piece and another end piece and a sleeve that goes between the 2 end pieces.
Oh, so you turned them and then glued them together.
I turned them and glued them together.
Okay. And that's why you painted it.
Well, to hide the glue joint.
Yeah. I figured that one out after the fact, after you told me it was 3 pieces.
But I only made 5 of these. These 3 pieces, and then these 2 as earrings for Anna.
It's pretty clever. You come up with an idea and you only make 5 of them?
Yep. It's time consuming.
Yeah. I saw those 2 at SWAT this year, I think. Or was it last year?
I don't remember exactly when. If I'm known for a shape, it's probably this piece right there. And I call that my Roswell series, flying saucers.
Yeah.
And that's an Ellsworth.
He picks the prettiest pieces of wood and just does a simple shape and it just kind of brings out the wood.
Yeah.
That's what
Yeah.
I liked about his work. And it's a lot more complex shape than you think. When you try and do it, it's hard to duplicate that stuff.
It is. I've tried duplicating his stuff, and I think I finally got to where I did him better. Because this is lighter than his pieces.
Yeah, that's the first thing I did notice was it's light. These, honestly, I've done that style before. I can't get my time out of it when I sell those things. It just takes me so long because I'm scraping, blowing the sawdust out, scraping, blowing the sawdust out, and I can't figure out a way to make them in a manner that I can.
There is, well, what did you get for yours?
Huh? Less than $100.
Oh,
It was ridiculous.
forget it.
Yeah.
Forget it. I got $350 for these 30 years ago.
30 years ago. Well,
Yeah.
I don't sell in the high-end markets. That's probably why, but I can't get my time out of that style. It's fun to make.
It takes you, a working man, it takes a day to make one of these. First, because my success ratio was 50%.
Yeah, they blow up.
They blow up. So it takes an hour. I'm sorry. It takes 4 hours in reality to make one of these.
And that.
3 hours is spent trying to get the shavings out.
Yep.
1 hour to do all the turning.
And a couple of days doing the finishing, a
Oh,
little
no,
step
no.
at a time.
Oh no, the finishing is simple. You take a spray can of lacquer and you spray it.
I have never done very well with lacquer. I don't
Well,
know why. I am an oil. I oil and oil and oil.
Well, literally that's 4 hours of work.
It's fast, but they blow up.
But you blow them up. Yeah.
All these are Anna's, you said?
Yes. All of those were made by
Like a little fish.
my beloved wife. Fish and frogs and snakes and all sorts of different things. Including
Yes, we're talking about you.
including spring flowers.
Oh, spring, I get it.
And some of them you've seen at SWAT, like these mesquite and agarita,
Uh-huh.
or these things, they were recent. And this year I had some with stones, with agate, little mosaics. I have one of those downstairs still.
Those are all of Anna's again.
Mostly.
Yeah.
But this was a collaboration piece, which is rare. It's one of these plant seeds, put in a steam cooker, so it's
To bend
flexible
it.
to bend it backwards, and then James made these wonderful legs for it. And the beak was just the stem of that seed, and turned little eyes and cat whiskers.
Okay, that's just freaky looking.
And some of the woodturners turned eggs, and James called
Oh,
it
it
Lonely
laid eggs.
Vigil.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, that's a weird piece.
And there's another split series piece. So it's deerskin.
Huh. I hadn't seen you do that before. I might have just not.
Well, those
Recognize it.
are relatively old, like 2000, early 2000s.
Yeah, early 2000, or maybe the late 90s.
Yeah, they're
I don't
relatively
know.
old.
Well, one reason is because I laid out the pattern for the holes in the leather, and I calculated the distance between the holes
Across the folds.
across the folds and everything. And it literally took me all day long to come up with this cut sheet for poking the holes in the leather. And then it took hours to lay out on the leather where all these holes were going to be. It only took like 15 minutes to poke the holes, but it took
Forever.
a day and a half to arrive at the pattern.
Yeah, you have more patience than I would. I would have
Well-
gotten frustrated by then.
I was lucky I didn't have to make a living doing this. So I never did make a living doing this.
This I like. That turned out nice.
Yeah, those were leftover pieces of aspen from making the doors and everything else.
Yeah.
And so he just beveled them along the edges.
You see the little mouse down there with the ultimate gesture of
That was your idea.
defiance.
As it escapes.
That's the other side.
Check
of
out the
that.
spindle turnings he put on these cabinets. Kind of a cool idea. You just told me there's scores of them in your building.
Yeah.
How long did it take you? How much time did you actually get into these? Is it straight off a skew to save time
No, I probably turned every one of them with a gouge.
with a gouge?
Yeah. I didn't use a skew at all.
And you got that smoother result straight off a gouge.
Yeah. When people expect it of you, you perform.
Oh. So you don't get
And
embarrassed.
people expected me to turn them that well, so I did.
Okay, let me ask you this. Do anybody other than woodturners come over and feel for texture on the knobs? It's just
No.
us. So nobody else is going to notice if it was slightly rough. But
No.
us
Nobody cares.
turners, we're idiots.
But I probably actually did hit it with a sandpaper,
Oh, you did?
more than likely.
Shapes.
Okay, so these are your first ones, and those over there are your latest
Yeah,
ones.
these are kind of the first ones. All this, and then this stuff came along. And I tried different things, like turn something out of a small crutch, out of 2 branches. So I turned a few of those. And then Cindy Droster did these demos finial boxes, so I did a bunch of those. And then I tried to turn something oval, like on centers, on different centers, and made these little things that look like perfume bottles, maybe.
Right.
Don't
That's
know.
exactly what I was thinking, an Art Deco
Yeah.
perfume bottle.
Or something I have on my business card that people think it's a big vase. It was red at some point. It's like this big, but it's, well, it's obviously not very big. It's, what, 3 inches tall?
So that's your secret. You
Yeah.
draw a miniature of high quality and make people think it's a giant vase that you can sell, huh?
And I had a bunch of that hackberry from a guy in Houston.
That's thin for hackberry, and I was noticing that because I struggle with hackberry with it being so
It was
stringy.
an accident. It
Oh.
was about a 1/4 inch thick, and then I chipped a few pieces out because the wood is relatively soft. And then I thought, well, I'll make it thinner. And then I made it fortunately it held together, so now it's really thin. It's almost
Yeah.
paper thin. But I didn't plan it that way. And I just tried to do different shapes, like cut the wood into whatever shapes and then turn it like this. You have all these points sticking out that can get your fingers.
They get your
cause
fingers. I also
injury. So,
sanding those corners as they're flying through. I've never
Yeah,
been able to do it. I always sand off the lathe.
yes, then you have to turn off the lathe and just sand it.
Yeah, just use the lathe as a holding device.
Right.
We don't have much of that wood anymore. That's escarpment cherry.
That
That's
is.
the local cherry, and it's very pretty.
I wish I could get more of it. I'm
There
building.
is a bunch around here, but you have
But
to
it
get
doesn't
it when
get-
it's relatively
right.
fresh. We have some pieces left, but not a whole lot. I'll show you that earring holder.
Sure.
Is that on? See, I made this thing, and it's very handy. I use it, I like it a lot, I use it a lot. And all it is a turn
Turning
base
down here and up
and a
there.
turning on top with some details inside.
And how did you attach it?
It has a groove, and I just put that metal mesh. I bent it into that conical, cylindrical, conical shape and stuck it in and then hung it up, and you can turn it. And it holds 1,000,000 of earrings. So I think something like that would also, like on
Okay.
an art market or so. it
I
would
was
probably-
wondering how you attach this to that. So you've got it. When you turned it, I figured it out. Up top, that's clever.
And
It
this,
allows you to spin it.
oh, this is actually turns through. I don't know. I forget how I did this, but yeah, I can turn it and add stuff or take it off. So
That's pretty clever.
yeah, it's kind of a practical little thing.
You built a lathe just for sanding.
Yeah. So it's variable speed up to that RPM. And it actually turns out that you can turn on it. It's strong enough. It's a supposed horse and a half motor.
That's strong enough.
Yeah.
Okay. This is cool.
Oh, my dust
You
collector.
turned your dust collector a turbine.
Yeah.
You guys. Oh, right. I got it. Right next to the sanding lathe.
Right.
You got a jet turbine to collect all your sanding.
Exactly. Exactly.
That's pretty cool.
And the reason it has this hyperbolic or whatever the
Right.
curve is here is to expand the airflow out to 20 inches. This is 20 inches.
Ah.
It actually is expanded
It
bigger.
comes out
so
at an
that
angle.
the dust from all over this area is sucked into this turbine
Just like an
and
airplane.
goes back into the bag.
Yeah. That's cool. You turned
And
it.
it works very well. It picks up the sanding dust. It does not collect the chips,
That,
which you don't want.
no.
You don't want chips going in there because that little thin plywood will get broken up if you do.
That might be the first thing I've ever seen where I could actually see it working to collect sawdust, sanding sawdust.
Yeah. Well, when you smoke, when I smoked, I would light up a cigarette and let people see the smoke being drawn in from this big area. And I don't
would
care
hate
how
to see a lit ember going through the sawdust. Might make a big boom.
and I don't care how many horsepower dust collector you've got. If you've got a 4 or a 5-inch tube on it, there is just no way to expand that airflow out to 20 some odd inches.
Nah, there isn't.
And that's the advantage this has over the typical dust collector, because it gets the airborne dust.
Yeah.
I even sold my breathing apparatus, my hood, because I don't need it anymore with this.
I can see that. That is clever. And you've got the standard bed sheets up to cover up your lathe tools so the shavings don't collect on them?
That's right, so they don't get packed. I mean, you can look over here and see shavings down in there already.
Yeah.
But that's right.
How often do you have to clean the shavings out of the rafters?
Never. I figure it this way. If any shavings get up there, they're just going to bump into the shavings that are already there and they'll fall off.
They'll all fall down.
Yeah. It's a permanent layer of dust up there.
Okay. Challenge.
Okay.
What's the least used tool right here?
This one.
Your Continental roughing gouge?
Yeah. Well, that's not really a roughing gouge. It's not. This is a roughing
Right.
gouge. That's just a spindle gouge. Well,
Most used.
Most used? This one.
A wicked finger on a deep flute parabolic bowl gouge.
Toward the bottom of the bowl, I use blunter tools
Right.
all the way down to that one.
Yeah. More traditional.
Yes. But that's to literally to shave right across the very bottom of the piece.
Well, I see a lot of online YouTubers that use those deep wings on their bowl gouge as a skew on spindles.
Yes, yes.
And I look at it and go, why don't you just use a skew?
Well, the tool that you don't see YouTubers using is this.
Okay, it looked like a scraper here, but that angle is way too steep. You're actually using that as a cutting tool. And you like that shape, obviously.
Well,
oh, different angles.
Different angles.
I can see. Because that's awfully steep.
That's awfully
that's
steep.
a cutting tool.
These are all shearing tools.
Okay.
Okay.
So you use that at an angle.
And
Okay, so you're presenting at 45 degrees with the oncoming grain. Yeah. And you're getting curly Q shavings. That's somewhat of a safe skew cut.
well, it is a safe skew cut as long as you don't let it flop over.
Catch the high side.
But this is for shearing across the bottom of a open box of some sort. And it hasn't been sharpened in probably a decade. But I use these things as shearing tools, not as scrapers. And here's another often used tool. And you notice that I grind the backside of the bevel off
heel
because you don't want very much of the wood in contact.
From my
enough.
understanding, the only part that really matters is that smooth bevel right
That's
along
correct.
there. All this other stuff is just
Strength.
faceted decorations.
Yeah. Understand how it works. It's set up so that the wood that I put in here has free access to air that flows across it.
Uh-huh.
If I have a rough turn pieces that I put in the rack, we open a front window up there
Uh-huh.
in the evenings.
Uh-huh. When it's cooler
When,
and the humidity comes down.
yes. And there's a fan back in the back corner that's on a timer. And at midnight, the fan comes on and it pulls in the moist night air, cooler air, and it has a tendency to dry off the pieces of wood. During the day, at 7 o'clock in the morning, the fan goes off. We close the window. The building is now cool, but it's relatively high humidity.
High humidity.
And so there's no stress on the wood. And so now as the temperature inside the building goes up, and it only goes up to about 80 degrees, then the piece dries out very slowly and very naturally. And my success ratio in drying rough turn pieces is like 99%.
A lot better than mine.
It's better than most people, but it's simply because I dry it out slowly. And the next night when we open the window, there's more moisture put back in it. So moisture put in it during the day, nighttime, and during the daytime, it's taken out.
So basically, you're controlling the humidity and less of the temperature.
Yes, the temperature is steady in here. Even during the summertime, it never gets over 80 degrees because there's 5.5 inches of insulation in all the walls. The ceiling is insulated. The doors are insulated. It just doesn't get hot in here if you don't open any doors and windows. If you open the doors, of course, it's going to get a lot hotter.
As an
But
air exchange.
Right. I built the shop to not be open to the outside air because I knew it would be tolerable in here.
Well,
And
that's
it really
Texas.
is. If you're working in here and it's 80 degrees, if you've got a fan that's blowing air across you, that's all you ever need.
Right.
So,
I am noticing none of your hollow forms are cracked, so
no.
99% sounds about right.
Well, if I said 100%, I'd be bragging.
Next door is his metal shop. And there's your water reclamation for the roof, and you put it inside for
Right.
freezing?
They're so that kids with 22 rifles wouldn't shoot holes in it.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense than freezing. Yeah, okay.
No. I was a kid once with a 22 rifle.
Oh,
I don't want to put the challenge in front of those kids.
I get you. Oh my.
What?
I'm going to call you out. I see it. I see something that makes you human.
Oh,
Ah! He does make minor mistakes every now and then.
I do make funnels. Yeah, I'm not perfect by any means.
Okay, out of your whole shop, the thing I am totally jealous about is that dust collector that you just showed me earlier. That's the coolest thing I've seen in a long time. You ever visited any other shops that had something cool that you wish you had done here?
No, I'm happy with my shop.
Sir,
If I was displeased with some aspect of it, I would change it.
change it.
So, no, I'm totally happy with my shop.
Cool.
Probably the only thing I might have done would be to put a track down through here so I could pick up a chunk of wood in the front there and
On a
be able
pulley.
to move it back to my lathe.
Pretty good.
But usually what would happen when I would get a good box elder tree that I knew I'd want to make blanks out of, rough turn bowls out of, I'd cut it all up into blanks. And I'd bring them in here and stack them up in here because this was a controlled environment. And so I might have 100 bowl blanks in here. Then, once I got them all cut up inside here, then I would start turning back there on my lathe, and I would make the bowl blanks. And they go straight into that rack right there.
So you just kind of made a production cycle,
Yeah.
one step, eight
Yeah,
times, stacked them up.
From here to the lathe, into the rack, and the shavings went out the back door and into the garden.
Okay, is that the oldest power tool you have?
Yes. This is the oldest power tool I have. This was bought in 1952. My father used it for all the time that he was alive. And the problem with it is we hauled it around in the back of a pickup or a trailer. And occasionally, since it was top heavy, it would fall out of the trailer or the pickup. So the sheet metal base for it got broken all up. I mean, all the welds were broken. It was just sitting there and it would flop over one side or the other. It just was ridiculous. So I took all the sheet metal off of it and I built a box.
Box jointed box.
Yeah, put it on. The unique thing about this is, what I did was I sealed it up as best I could.
Uh-huh.
You know, here's a leather flap that seals up this corner, okay? And I made it so that it has a
Shop back.
shop back on it. And the shop back pulls in air from around the blade and from around here and whatnot. You gotta have airflow. If you don't have airflow, it doesn't work.
And it collects down here.
And it goes down into here, and it is in a constricted airflow coming around from around the fan until it gets into the box, and then all of a sudden it's
Release.
a big area, and it drops the sawdust and kind of trickles over to the back, up and over and out through here. So it drops all the sawdust in the box, which you can see.
Kind of like a
When
cyclone.
it gets about, kind of like a cyclone. It works like a cyclone. So when it gets 2/3 full, you can stop and open up the side and take all the sawdust down.
Just
So
scoop
it
it.
works much better than it did when it was brand new.
And you don't have to empty the shop back very often.
You don't empty the shop back because the sawdust dropped over here. All you want is the airflow.
Right.
And it works very well, actually.
Craftsman table saw with a jet tabletop or
Yes.
jet.
Yes, somebody gave me that, and so I adapted it to this saw. This is a pretty good product.
And this is Anna's solution for your funneling.
Yeah, I made a funnel out of that piece, so she saved it.
And I imagine you know where everything is.
Pretty well. The problem is that my wife comes out here and cleans up, and she
No.
moves stuff. So I don't know where everything is.
I only got into wood turning in probably about late 90s, early 2000s when Dad got into it, and he kind of hooked me because I was doing flat work and building, and some guy gave him a free turning class as if it was a free piece of crack to get him hooked onto the hobby forever. And he spent the rest of his life just spending more and more money on his hobby.
Yeah. Invariably, that's what happens when you get involved in wood turning.
But it seems
I,
every few years he would go down a different kind of panel. What was hot and interesting in the industry.
My dad was a small town contractor / carpenter / builder / handyman. He would build a house about every 3 years or so. And in the meantime, he would build cabinets for people or put in their driveways or whatever. And so I grew up helping him and learning all these different trades. And when I was 4 years old, he came in one day and he gave me his old pocket knife and he said, James, he said, here's my old knife. He said, I bought me a new knife. He said, you can have my old knife because I'm tired of you asking to borrow one all the time. So since I was 4 years old, I've carried a pocket knife.
You still have that one?
No, I don't have the original knife, but I still have the same inclination to work wood. And I've woodworked all my life. Even if I was doing something else for a living, I still ended up working wood at home. And in the early 80s, I did mostly flat work, cabinet work, built bookcases and gun cases and this, that, and the other. And one day I stopped somewhere and I picked up a copy of Fine Woodworking.
Mm-hmm.
And I got home and I started reading it, and inside it was an article about a wood turning symposium that they had up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And I looked at those pieces and I thought, it's not humanly possible. One of the pieces from David Ellsworth was like, I'm gonna guess, 20 inches tall, 1/8 of an inch thick, and you could tell it was 1/8 of an inch thick because there was a great big hole in the side of it where it had a natural inclusion, and you could see the edge of the hole, and it was exactly 1/8 of an inch. And the hole that he had hollowed it through was less than an inch in diameter. And I thought, it can't be done. But of course it can.
Right.
Well, that intrigued me. That and looking at the other pieces that were at the symposium. So a couple or 3 months later, I found another copy of Woodturning, Woodworking, fine woodworking, in which a guy was on the cover with this huge piece of wood, 3 feet in diameter or so, and he's attacking it with this harpoon-like device. You know, it looked like it was 7 feet long.
Yep.
And I bought that copy and I took it home and I studied that article. It turned out the guy had built his own lathe. Mm-hmm. Well, at that point in time, I couldn't afford to buy a lathe, but I could afford to build one. And so I started and I built my own lathe this was 1983. And I started turning big pieces. That was,
That's kind of how I found you, as the big pieces.
Yeah, well, the first piece I ever turned on that lathe was finished at 24 inches in diameter. The trick is it only had a 1/2 horsepower motor on it, and it took forever to turn that piece.
Here's a question. When I started riding motorcycles, I got way too big a motorcycle to learn to ride on. I know that now. Okay? You started turning big stuff from the beginning. Are you telling other people to start big like that?
No, I'm not advocating anybody do what I did. But I will advocate that you always buy a bigger lathe than what you think you'll need. You can turn the smallest thing on a big lathe,
Yep.
but not the reverse. So anyway, I started turning great big pieces. But it turns out that you need a conventionally styled lathe in order to finish off the bottom.
Yep.
So that you can reverse turn it. And so I subsequently waited about 3 or 4 years and built my conventionally styled lathe, which is the lathe that I use for the vast majority of my pieces. It was not a puny lathe. It weighed 1,500 pounds.
Yeah,
And it would swing 24
that's a small lathe.
24 by 4 feet. But it was portable. I built it to have an axle bolted onto it and a tongue. And I literally probably have 5,000 miles on that lathe. I pulled it all the way up to Oklahoma, to Houston, and all in between.
So you didn't waste time bringing logs back to you. You went to the logs?
No, I brought logs home to me, but nevertheless, moving my lathe around to demonstrate.
Oh.
Didn't you even go to Tennessee or to one of Gaithersburg?
Oh yeah, I went to Tennessee and I went to I think that it was the 3rd AAW symposium and demonstrated at the AAW symposium.
Mm-hmm.
And the lathe had a license plate,
Yes,
like a trailer.
yes.
A trailer license plate.
You still have it?
The lathe?
Yeah.
No.
It's in
No,
San
yes.
Antonio. He sold it to a guy who studied with him,
Yeah.
and it lives now in San Antonio.
But I was the only licensed woodturner in the United States.
Oh, that's bad. That's bad. That's a bad.
You like that one, huh?
I caught it. Okay, here's another question for you. What's the most underappreciated skill a woodturner needs?
There are so many aspects of woodturning that I cannot make a general statement. If you're involved in woodturning, the hardest thing is to come up with a concept for something new.
Yeah. I've very rarely seen anything totally new.
It is,
I've seen derivatives quite often.
yes, but it's very difficult to come up with something new. And if you fail at that, don't be embarrassed, because 99% of the people around you have failed at that also.
I think the most original stuff I've seen lately is the Derek Wyman, who does the figures, the animals. I'd never seen anybody do that before, the way he does it.
Yeah.
That's one he did at SWAT. That's the demo piece.
Yeah.
He turned from scratch. During the demo, he turned that armadillo.
And that's all done on a lathe. And he now does a lot of hand carving after the
Yes.
fact, but he establishes the shapes here. I've never seen anybody do the thought process he brought to the. That's the most original thing I've seen
Yes.
in probably the past decade.
Yes.
And he didn't plan it. He asked people, what do you want me to turn?
Does that not piss you off?
What?
Hey, just throw me an idea. I can do it.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm just totally jealous.
Imagination and his three-dimensional, how he can, yeah, I mean, and I bought that from him because I really wanted the armadillo.
So going back to that, you were saying it's hard to come up with something original.
Yes. The one thing that a lot of woodturners don't learn how to do properly is to sand. And I was at a Saturday woodturning demonstration by David Ellsworth in the 1980, early 80s, 82, 3.
I don't know. I didn't know you guys.
And David made a quick, soft sanding pad by gluing some 3/4 inch thick foam rubber to a sanding disc, and then covering that foam with sandpaper. He did it very crudely, but he showed how that soft sanding pad would sand and not mark up your turning. And so I went home and I developed sanding disc that had a leather pad on the end of it, which was 1 inch wider than the foam, so that the leather held out a 1/2 inch past the foam, and therefore it just floated the sandpaper across the wood. It didn't put any pressure on the edge because the leather, it was just flexible.
But the leather would prevent it from rolling over.
Yeah, it prevented the sandpaper from being torn. If you touched a corner or something, it wouldn't tear the sandpaper. But what that meant was that you didn't end up with circular scratches, because the circular scratches are put on by the edge of the sandpaper. It's not put on by the body of the sandpaper, only the.
Anything you want to tell the viewers before I take off? You're probably going to get 20,000 viewers in the next week.
Oh,
Is there anything you want to say to them?
have fun.